Welcome back to the Female Dating Strategy, the meanest female-only dating podcast in the internet. I'm Diana.
And I am Rose. And Diana, can I just say I relish hearing your voice pronounce that we are the meanest female dating website on the entire internet. Every time you say it.
I have so much fun saying that. I feel so cool every time I hear Rose say it. I loved her saying Dimet, and I loved her saying, welcome back to the meanest female-only dating podcast. I always loved her saying that. Oh my God. It was every single time. And I also like that do that, that little song they played. It was so fun. I was like, okay, it's time to get my work on, time to pick up my dishes, time to do the laundry, time to get a bite.
It's so true. That is what I would listen as well.
It's like the bat signal.
It is.
It's the bat signal to get the girls together.
I just relish hearing it, and it almost chills up my spine because it's like I was listening to it for years, and now I'm on a call or on a podcast, hearing you pronounce it, and it kicks off us talking for the next hour. And how fucking cool is that?
This is a dream gig. Honestly, when I look at the culmination of all of the past actions I've taken since I first started listening to the podcast and since I was on the forum until I got here, I've developed so many skills that have allowed me to be in this position now where I really not just get to learn from doing this, but really enjoy it. I really relish getting to do this every week with you. It's one of the few things I can say, in addition to a good workout or a nice bowl of ice cream or a great TV show that I'm dying to watch. This is one of those things that every weekend I just look forward to sitting and dissecting the worlds with you, and I feel like we've reached a nice, happy, synchronicity or whatever you want to call it, the synergy that we have. I'm sorry, I sound really corporate, I'm the corporate jargon of synergy and cohesion,
Hey, if it's true, it's true.
But yeah, I think that it's very heartwarming and fun. More than anything, it's really fun to do. I mean, if anyone is listening and wondering, oh, did the past group of women have fun doing this? I can tell you with 100% certainty. Oh yeah, they definitely did. This is a lot of fun.
It is true. It is something I look forward to every week, and I still am sort of in disbelief. And you know what? I hope I never get over that, because I think that adds to the sort of excitement and energy that we're bringing with our own voices. And this was something when we were in the interview process with Savannah. She's like, listen, we've said all we can say. We're just sounding like broken records at this point, which I don't agree with that, Savannah, by the way. I always thought you and Ro brought interesting nuance to every discussion. You were never repeating anything that didn't bear repeating. But it's still really exciting that they were like, listen, we're ready to hand it off. We've done our part, and now it's up to you. And like you say, we're getting to know each other, and we're developing our own synergy. And it's so exciting as somebody from the American Midwest to have met anonymously, you over in Southeast Asia, and having the chance to have this ongoing conversation. I mean, when in the history of the world has this ever been possible?
Never.
Never. Literally never. And I think it's something where we were just talking about this before we started, where we were like, sometimes it's easy to feel guilty. Why do I have this position in this role when there are so many other deserving women, brilliant women, wonderful women? Well, the vagaries of fate have brought us here. I'm not going to turn it down. But also, I do not take for 1 second for granted the fact that this is something that has never been done in history. I mean, we are forging new paths. We are forging new ground in the world of women's liberation. And I just could not be more enthralled.
Exactly. And I always think about, Angelina Jolie mentioned something that was similar to this when she was talking about, I felt immense guilt with the privilege of my position as, a famous Hollywood actress that, who died and made me the ambassador for so many of these humanitarian issues, because there's probably a woman out in Syria in a tent somewhere in a refugee camp who's probably just as talented, just as beautiful, just as bright as I am. And the only reason she's not in my position is because of her birth. So I think, some of us have to think about the fact that we won a birth lottery based on where we grew up in the world. And, where we grew up and how we grew up afforded us these privileges and, these kinds of perspectives that we shouldn't take for granted. And I think that, people get so caught up in this woke conversation of privilege versus oppression. And people fixate almost entirely on making oppression their entire identity to the point where, they just participate in these oppression Olympics of who's the most miserable. And it's why would I want to participate with you on a who's going to die miserable campaign? That seems like a fucking waste of my time, But I think that, the only thing you can really do from your position as a privileged person is work the cards you're dealt. That's all you can do. And if you are a person with that kind of privilege to have this kind of platform where we're able to talk to women about important social issues and we're able to change their mind or even move the needle by an inch, we're doing so much with that position. And so, instead of like engaging in this pity party of like, okay, what can I do to make myself more interesting so that I sound more oppressed and so people take me more seriously? Like, instead of that, just look at where you're standing and be like, you know what? I was incredibly lucky that I didn't have to fight for some of these things like other people did. This is like the whole thing about the Nepo baby debate as well, right? Nobody is arguing that you shouldn't use your network. That's pretty much how everybody lands their jobs. All we're saying is it's okay to acknowledge the fact that you had a leg up. And nobody is going to think that you're not less talented because of it. Like some of my favorite talented people are Nepo babies, like Tracy Ellis Ross, or, so many famous Nepo babies that I actually absolutely adore. I mean, Jack Black technically is a Nepo baby if you consider how badass his mom is,
It's so true. Oh my gosh. I love it, Jack Black's mom. In case you don't know, she was a NASA researcher. Wasn't she like a physicist?
She calculated the trajectory for Apollo 13 to land while she was in the delivery room with Jack Black giving birth to him.
Yeah, she was on the delivery bed in active labor while she finished up that formula for Apollo 13. How amazing is that? So we honor you, Mom of Jack Black. But this is such a good point. I like this quote that you bring up about Angelina Jolie because I think it ties in with another one I've read a couple times. I don't remember it word for word, but it was something like, somebody was talking about like, how cool is it that we live in a world where Einstein, could calculate the theory of relativity. And somebody else was like, what bothers me? What actually comes to mind when I think about that? How many Einsteins and Picassos and Beethovens ended up in lives of drudgery as janitors, as cooks, as maids, because they were not in a position that allowed them to flourish with all their brilliance. And so there is so much brilliance that goes unacknowledged and uncovered and unearthed. And you're right. This is something that I've always refused, even though I tend to have quite a melancholic disposition. I tend to be quite the depressive. I mean, I am an artiste after all, but I never wanted that to become my calling card as far as my personality, right? I refused. That was something that was very private for me, was my melancholy. But in public, knowing all that I've been given, knowing that all that I've been gifted, like you say, the hands I've been dealt have been amazing cards to have been dealt. I mean, the fact is in the fact that we're talking right now on this podcast, right? Like, how many applications did they get? And I don't think I'm any more deserving than any other, but I'm sure as hell not going to let this opportunity go to waste. And I'm not going to spend my time belly aching and bemoaning some of the disadvantages that I have had, because all in all, cumulatively, the picture of my life is one of immense privilege and pleasure. It has been a joy to be me. Even when I'm like, oh, I need to lose weight, or like, oh, that boy was so awful. It's like, listen, my life is still great. Like, I'm still sleeping on nice sheets. You know what I'm saying? Like, my bed's still real cushy. And also, that does not move the needle. If anything, that leads to apathy. And I think, again, I'm always like, what do we have to do to stand up to those in power? What do they want from us in order to ensure we do not? Apathy, pessimism, cynicism, these are all these are all the tricks that they truck with in order to keep us compliant and submissive. And so I am always looking for what is going to galvanize people in general, right? So having this podcast, amazing. I'm loving it, Diana. I'm really enjoying getting to know you. And today we are doing a continuation of last week's topic.
Correct. We are talking about, again, Scrotal Recall Part 2. Part 2. Duh. Am I pronouncing the French right?
As good as you can. We're not French, so we can only do what we can do.
I mean, sorry to any of the French listeners. We know how y'all feel about that.
But what can we do? We don't have the tongue muscles, okay? We just do our best.
I'm sorry. I didn't come from a country that was colonized by French people. Actually, I didn't come from the part of the country that was colonized by French people, so...
I like that correction.
Because we were colonized by a lot of people, you know what I mean?
Right,
French was not one of them.
Oh my gosh. So yes, today we continue our examination, our exploration regarding gender equality and the statistics that help us actually visualize and grasp how far we've come and how far we have yet to go.
So, I think one thing we should start with is, one of the earliest things that was difficult for me to comprehend when I first started reading the FDS posts on Reddit was this concept of splitting 50-50 on dates and stuff. And a big part of that was because, I'm a very independent person, and I figured like I didn't want to feel like I was taking advantage of someone, but I didn't want to feel like I was being taken advantage of either. So, for me, it was very important to understand why this was actually the most equitable way of handling this kind of social interaction. But it still felt weird. You know what I mean? Because it's so against the sort of libfem rhetoric that was so prevalent at the time. And so, we title this particular segment, Don't Get Mad, Get Paid, the labor and pay gap. And so I think we should Rose, do you want to kick it with the labor statistics and what was the kind of data you pulled out about how many women are actually working out there? And from the women that are working, what is the disparity between their paycheck and a man's paycheck?
So this varies widely across the globe, of course. And this is something that's been, we actually have only been looking at the statistics in a formalized academic way since 2006, Diana. That's as far back as obviously we have data from before then, but an institution that has specifically gathered and compiled and organized this into meaningful information, as opposed to simply statistics, is another story. So it's actually a global gender gap index. And that has been in effect. It was launched in 2006. And it is the longest standing index, quote, tracking the progress of numerous economies' efforts towards closing these gaps over time. So we don't even have 20 years of actually looking at this information within a contextual kind of format. And so if we look across what they have gathered here, they've gathered benchmarks from 146 economies. So roughly looking at 2/3 of the world's economies. And if you look at, again, this is something we mentioned last week, the fact that right now, if we continue on this current trajectory, it will take us 134 years to reach full parity between genders. So we still have a ways to go. And I always want to encourage us to look at, how far we have come. We really have. But there's still so much to do. So let's look at some of these rankings. Okay. So in 2024, the Global Gender Gap Index shows that no country has achieved full gender parity. But 97%, or almost 97% of these economies have closed more than 60% of their gap. So back in 2006, when they first started looking at these gender parity, there was a difference of 85%. Now we're down to 60%. So progress has been made. Who leads us all? Iceland, Europe, actually Southeast Asia and Asia have come a long ways as well. Latin America and Caribbean also doing a lot of work, a lot of good work. In last place is Middle East and North Africa. So that's where we have a huge disparity between pay. But here's the thing about pay. And again, this is something where you might have heard the notorious, to every dollar that a man earns, white women earn something like 82 cents. Black women earn 60 or 56 cents. And immigrant women and other women of color earn something like 35 to 40 cents per dollar. And that's in the US. So if we extrapolate that across the globe, obviously, it's so difficult because there are so many factors to look into play. But I think that the dollar to the cents is something that we really have to start understanding, because it's not simply a matter of the pay that you receive for the work that is done. It's also the investiture, the dividends. Whatever money you make now, if it sits in anything that's earning any kind of percentage of interest rate, there are dividends that are being paid. And over time, the compound interest is something that just grows magnificently. This is how many of the wealthy actually live. They don't even draw from their bank accounts. They just live off of the dividends. And if this is something that we are not achieving in real time, if you're looking at it over the course of a long time tenure, like 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, by the time you're going to retire, what time do you hope to retire by, Diana? Have you thought about that?
You know what? When I was younger, in my country, I think the average retirement age is 60, right? So I think that I looked forward to retiring earlier than that. I was like, oh, I'll be one of those people that makes it big and then retires in my 40s. But I think the nature of my industry is that I could probably go on until my 90s. When you're working on a set or something, yeah, it's a high stress situation and it takes a toll on your body. But I think that, I've always looked at George R. R. Martin's life And I'm like, what, to be a person who gets to procrastinate to that level and then just gets to travel the world and like, everybody's like hanging on you to like be an executive producer on shows and like you just chilling, Like he's working, but he's in a retired pace of working. I mean, like I really admired people like Betty White and Lucille Ball and all of these people who, started all of these systems. And like Lucille Ball is the reason why the Scroats have, I think, Star Trek.
That's right.
Yeah, she was like the mother of modern sci-fi.
She funded it, didn't she? When the studios didn't want to produce it. Yeah, she funded it and produced it, guys. Okay. That Lucille Ball did that.
Yep, a woman did that. And then, like I looked up to like people like Hedy Lamarr and stuff. And I always looked up to people who were in the film industry because so many of them had, multifaceted sort of roles in other industries. And that's definitely what I felt from some of my actor friends as well, is that they just believe like you've been given this one life and like they're so all in on constantly learning and training and expanding their brain. And they take kung fu classes and they take yoga teaching and they do psychology. And it's like, there's so many avenues that, I always think about like, have you ever seen The Good Place?
Yes.
And like, I loved what happened for the character of Tahani, like the South Asian character on that show, because she basically had exactly what I would want in life. Basically, when she reached like the afterlife and she had like an endless life, she used it to learn all the things she wanted to learn. She learned how to play the violin. Like she explored all of her interests and then found the thing that she was really passionate about, which was like designing afterlives for other people. And yeah, I thought that was really cool. But she did everything, right? She learned all the languages she wanted to learn. She did all of the violin and instrument training that she wanted to learn. She did everything she could possibly do. And then she was like, yeah, I found what I want to do. And then she basically goes into the sunset and designs afterlives. And so for me, I've never really thought about retirement. And there's a period where I want to stop working at a company and just collect a paycheck or collect a kind of pension and live that kind of life. Because honestly, I'm also really afraid of, like, I know a lot of people in my life who are very inactive. Like just recently, there are people around me I've known who've had heart attacks and died in their 30s and 40s because they've had extremely high stress jobs and like absolutely no activity. So for me, to enjoy my daily life, like I look at these Italian nonas and I look at how the food they eat and like how they keep active and like they kind of find some kind of purpose or a side hustle or something that they do. So I think even if I officially retired from the workforce at 60, which is like probably the standard for most countries, I think I would still want to do something on the side. I don't know if I would ever retire in that capacity. You know what I mean? Like maybe retire from capitalism, yes, but I think want my brain to stay agile. I'd probably want to take more classes, probably want to teach something, do something. Like I always liked that in Gilmore Girls, Emily Gilmore, the grandmother, like she who had never worked like a day of her life, sprinkle, sprinkle. She ended up becoming a curator for a museum, like a whale museum in Massachusetts or something, or Rhode Island. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, I like the idea that we can constantly reinvent ourselves at every stage of our life. And some of the best people I know, they found new ways to challenge themselves. And, they always had that mindset from a really young age of like, yeah, I'm always going to keep doing things. Like, I always loved Betty White. And I was like, yeah, she's always doing things. Like, she never retired and she had so much fun and she had such a full life. So for me, the focus is really like, I'm a person with numerous interests and, I just want to be intellectually stimulated. So for me, I would want to do multiple different things. I don't think I'd ever really want to retire like that.
I love this response. Well, and I was just going to say, a lot of women who are working at a conventional 9 to 5 or who started working, from a very early age, and a lot of people in general, they're just working to live, but they have to work a very long time in order to be able to live. And so I know a lot of people are just like counting down the days and calculating, to the day when they can finally afford to retire, because so many people work conventional careers that do drain your life force much quicker than I think the kind of paths that we've been fortunate to take, sort of in the creative arts industries. These are not the more conventional paths, Diana, and thank God for it. But if we're looking at like the average retirement age, 60 to 65, looking at life expectancy, and then we look at who is the most impoverished group of all retirees, it's always women. Women are always the poorest amongst us when we're retiring. And if you think about it, who's guaranteed health care? Who's guaranteed health in general? What if you have a long-term chronic condition? What if you have a long-term disability? What if you get to your retirement and then you have a stroke and you're paralyzed? I mean, so many things can happen. And this is why if we don't get the bag now, we are setting ourselves up for a world of hurt when we're most vulnerable. I mean, sometimes I see these old people and my heart just hurts for them. Their quality of life is so poor. They're so exhausted. They're so beaten down. They can't even take themselves out for a dinner or a movie. They can't buy themselves new shoes. And I think this is sort of the quiet despair of many. And that's why I think we emphasize so much like, how dare you go all to the work of getting ready for a date, of grooming, of perfuming, of clothing, of shoeing yourselves into these beautiful shoes. And then you're saying, no, I really think it's supposed to be 50-50. We have never earned as much as men ever. Never in the history of earning money has it ever happened. Why are we demanding this now? So you're right. I absolutely like that you use that example of the 50-50 on dates. And women will say, well, if I pay my own half, then he won't expect sex. Well, I don't care if he does pay 100%. He still shouldn't expect sex. This is not a prostitution provider. If you're on Tinder or Hinge or Bumble, this is not like prostitution light. And you should be able to enjoy a dinner out. You should be able to enjoy being courted without the fear that you're going to give him a blowjob at the end of it as thank you for the ice cream treat.
But I think that's the male psyop, right? It's kind of interesting how they've come up with this idea of like, oh, if they have to pay 100% for a date, they're entitled to sleep with you. And that they've made it a prostitution arrangement, and women have readily accepted that prostitution arrangement because it's actually deeply insulting to suggest that just because I had a dinner with you, like by that definition, anytime I go on a business meeting with someone, if they pay for the dinner, am I obligated to sleep with every member of their company?
Right. That's the logic we need to understand, how illogical it is. But like you say, I think you're right. 100% it is a psyop. At every turn where women have been able to get our own credit card, open our own bank account, men have been finding ways in order to obfuscate and to pervert our means of self-support. Because again, I want to put this on a t-shirt. If he can't feed you, he can't starve you. That is the power that so many men, that's the power and control they want over us. The labor and gender pay gap, it is fundamental to women's liberation. Everything starts from the almighty dollar. Lord, I wish it weren't the case, but these are the facts as they lay on the ground. We have to truck with reality, ladies. This is the reality we face. I was able to, for the first time this year, to purchase my own home. And Diana, you were mentioning in our pre-talk how you also have purchased, I think, homes, multiple?
This is the first home I've purchased, but I inherited two from my grandmother.
Okay. So you're a landholder, Diana.
I'm a landowner.
You're a landholder, you're a landowner, you have a real estate portfolio. And I love this for you. And this is what I want for all women. And don't forget, we're also up against, like in the United States at least, we're up against rapacious Wall Street, private equity, trying to buy up all of, the single family homes, any home that's even reasonably priced, and rent it back out to us for exorbitant rates, because here's another way they can siphon money away from people who are working to make a living. So for women especially, I want us to understand that if we do not get our bag, we will literally be left a bag lady on the streets in the future. It's all but guaranteed, particularly in the US. Since we have no social safety nets, we have no health care. You're one bad car accident away from living on the streets. And so there has to be absolute ruthlessness. I'm thinking again of the story of your dad and him insisting or buying that home for your family's maid, and how her brother-in-law literally tried to steal her home from her. And this is not unusual. I mean, and I read about women divorcing and like, oh no, my husband, of course he understands that like our children and I need somewhere to live. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. If he cannot get use from you, you are as useless to him as a broken toaster. And he will do with you what he would do with a broken toaster. He will toss it out.
And I also, I want to suggest to our listeners the kind of reading situation. So basically, there's this book that I read called Caliban and the Witch, and it's by a woman called Silvia Federici. And so a lot of people probably are kind of maybe somewhat acquainted with Marxist principles, such as, what is it called? Primitive accumulation. So just to give people like a refresher, primitive accumulation, according to Marx, was this idea that the winners of capitalism, as we see it now, were essentially people who were early landowners at the time. So like think of a game of a Monopoly, right? Because Monopoly was invented by a woman to teach people capitalism, and it does a really good job of showing this. As you know, if you've ever played a game of Monopoly, the person who gets the land first is the one who usually is guaranteed to win the game. The person who controls the most property, like picks up all the prime spots, those are the guys who end up winning the game. And it can go on forever, but there's no way for you to catch up and beat that person at the game after they've got all of the prime spots. So Karl Marx suggested that the people who are benefiting from capitalism are people who basically owned land first, And so the fight was between the people who are cultivating the land, i.e., like the people who are the working class, people who are working for a living and creating value for the C-suite people. And the people who are deriving value are people who are shareholders, who have a stake and who have a portion of the control of that land or that entity. But Silvia Federici brought a kind of feminist perspective to this particular thing, where she was like, actually, it wasn't just access to like resources like land. We have to start thinking about the first capital in primitive accumulation, which is actually the capital of women. So a guy, an aristocrat, for example, who has access to multiple women, has access to multiple laborers who are going to potentially be the people who work on his land. And so the guy who has access to the most women is by far the person who's benefiting the most from quote unquote primitive accumulation. So men, if you look at like the way the global workforce is structured, the American government and the British government could have done any number of things to get manufacturing jobs and all other kinds of jobs for the people who are already in their country who are working class to be able to work. Those people were demanding better working conditions. Those people were demanding for raises. And what do those countries do? They outsource that labor to other countries, and or they brought in immigrants from those countries to work at like absolutely zero cost or under the table at these companies. And they put them on these visas where they were basically trapped into staying and working off like their debt or whatever, like they were indentured servants essentially. So yeah, and this was kind of the case with like the abolishment of slavery, right? When slavery was abolished, the British had a lot of people, like they had like a whole bunch of sugarcane that needed to get cut out in Guyana and the Caribbean and all these other places. And so they brought people from India over there to do the labor that all the black people were obviously, once they were free, were no longer doing. And so they always found ways to get capital from the global south. And this extends to the women. If you look at like a country like India or Bangladesh, right? Like take them for an example, because they're also the hubs of manufacturing in South Asia. The vast number of people who are represented in the unofficial informal work sector are not even people who show up in data statistics. There's actually no statistics for them. There's a lot of people who are employed in that informal sector, but because they're paid under the table, there is no way of actually gauging how many of them participate in the workforce. It's safe to say that in India, if you're extremely poor or if you're extremely rich, it's very unlikely that you're in the workforce, because we're one of the few countries where when the household income increases, women are less likely to work. So mainly the people that you see over there are either lower middle class or middle class, right? And these are the people that are generating wealth and value for countries abroad, because your shirt, everything that you wear, all of this stuff is produced in these countries. And these women are the ones that are shortchanged. So like if you look at like, let's just pick India, for example. India's workforce, like their labor participation is around 35% are women. And these are just women who are in white collar jobs. So bear in mind that this 35% are the minority. 81% of Indian men are employed in the official, white collar workplace sector. We have no data on what the women who are working under the table for money, like in the informal sector as they're called out here, we have no idea who they are and how much they make.
Damn. That is such a good point, Diana. This is the other side of the data coin. Data can only represent so much of what is reality. Often it's far worse. Right?
Exactly. But with that assumption, we have to assume that not only is their labor not accounted for, we're also not including the people who are bringing valuable and tangible services that have no tangible value. For example, people who are homemakers, people who are stay-at-home moms. These are the people, like, you are performing the role of a chef, a maid, a sex worker, and a nanny for a guy for no cost at all.
And yet, we take it as a matter of fact, due course of nature. I mean, this is, again, I feel like we have to really understand. I'm so glad you use this term, PSYOP, psychological operation. I feel like this is something that slaveholders and landholders have understood for a very long time. You have sort of the hard methods of control and manipulation, and you have the soft methods of control and manipulation. And by this, I mean, you could either whip someone, you could put them in the stocks, you can indenture, you can trade them for slave labor, or, you can present this as, well, you have a roof over your head, you have food in your belly, you have clothes on your back. I mean, do you think you're supposed to get that for free? Of course, you're supposed to work in the fields for 12 hours without pay. I'm paying for all of this. And that mentality is still very much prevalent. I mean, this is something that Marx, for all of his wrongs, he got so much right. And it's like, listen, we have landholders and we have peasants. And guess what? We're the peasants, okay? And I say that with pride because peasants have built this land from the ground up, okay? So it's not like we shouldn't have pride in ourselves. I'm just saying, do not get it confused. The fact that you have a 401k or that you drive a nice car, or even that you own a home that your bank actually owns. We are still peasants scrambling for pennies. And again, this idea of ruthlessness for women, it's so hard because we have been like domesticated. We have been relegated to the domicile, and we have been expected to be subservient in order not to be murdered and or raped and or cast out to the streets. Obviously, self-preservation trumps all, but we have to move beyond that survival instinct. We have to move into the thriving portion of our future, and only we can grasp that with our own two hands. Nobody's going to give it to us. Remember, like, power is only given when it is being demanded and taken. It's never being given when it's being asked for politely.
Yep. That's the thing, right? Like, I think there's some politician or some like orator or somebody who was in discussion at the Oxford Union, and like the British were like, yeah, but we gave you your freedom. It was like a Bangladeshi spokesman or something. And they were like, we gave you your freedom. And he's like, you didn't give it to us. We took it from you.
Yes, exactly.
And so women need to apply the same logic here because, we've done this in previous episodes where we said, please do the math, right? So if you are a person who is essentially someone's nanny and someone's maid and someone's cook and someone's sex worker and then someone's business development person, I want you to go today and go and look up what those jobs actually entail and how much a person who works in that profession gets paid. And then tally up all of those salaries and tell me if it doesn't come up to at least $500,000, why the fuck are you leaving $500,000 on the table and living your life for free? Are you an idiot?
No, you're not an idiot, but yet you're acting in an idiot fashion. So we are trying to get you to wake up to this reality. Then, like, here's the point too. Also, when you mention all those tasks, that's a salary if you're working that job from 9 to 5. That's not the salary when you're doing it 24 hours a day with no holidays.
Oh yeah, there's no overtime. And then you don't have any like holiday overtime either. You don't have any bonuses. You're not going to get promoted.
No workplace protection, no insurance, no 401k. And you compound this by 2 decades and just look at them. You have literally left millions of dollars on the table. And I guarantee you, when you're 70 and your kids are busy working their asses off elsewhere, because that's what we raise our kids to do, is to go off and become functional, productive members of society. And the man has either left you or died, or he's sitting right next to you, rotting away, expecting you to continue to be his maid and his sex slave and his cook and his cleaner. Okay?
Exactly.
You are going to wish you had those millions of dollars. You are going to wish you had that money to just get on a cruise ship and sail away into retirement because you've earned it.
Yep. And you know what else? The crazy thing is when you look back at this kind of sacrifice that women make in their lives, right? I mean, first of all, as we know, a lot of women have a lot of resentment about doing this. Not every woman has the option to stand up for themselves in this way if they come from a country where that's not respected or valued. But the problem with leaving the bag on the table and why marriage and motherhood can sometimes be a scam is that if you completely stay dependent on another man, tomorrow, even for fun things, okay, think about your budget, right? Like, let's bring up Ballerina Farms here for a second because she might be a good example of what I want to talk about. So her husband is effectively a son of a billionaire, right? He's got all the money in the world to make her dreams come true. He could have probably put her through Juilliard, right? He has the ability to afford a nanny for her, but he chooses not to do any of those things. So she always has to beg for scraps from him because she doesn't even have control over the value she brings from her image for him, right? From her brand, because she is the brand and he is the one that makes the profit off of that brand. So basically, he is kind of like Hollywood in that he has licensed her likeness and used it as a way to fill his own pockets. And she doesn't see a cut of that. So this woman is spending the entire extent or like the full length of her life begging him for scraps to, get $100 to, I don't know, buy a dress from H&M or something, She's not really in a position where she can barter with him or control her money in any way. And I know a lot of women, like when I was in college and stuff, who were dating guys who were like, oh, we have a joint account and I just let him handle all the finances and I just trust him to do this and he just does that. And I was like, why would you allow anybody to have this level of financial control over you? And I don't know what it is that encourages some people to do that because almost the second I had my own bank account, the first thing I did was to make sure none of my family had any access to that shit. Why do you need to know?
It's all mine, all mine. That's right, Diana. That was the right attitude.
And I didn't care that they took it personally or they didn't take it personally. I was like, okay, you can have a look at my bank account if you put this much in.
Oh my God. Every conversation, I like you more and more.
Like, with me, like, you have to pay, like, especially when men try to make me do work. Like my uncle, for example, he always wants me to suggest like these, perfumes and stuff that he needs to buy, like cologne and shit that he needs to buy. He always wants my opinion on it. I'm like, I charge consultancy fees for this, right? Like that's how I get him to get most of my stuff. I'm like, you can pay for this and you can buy me movie tickets to that and you can buy me a cake here or you can buy me another perfume there. Like, I honestly think that everybody needs to have like a hustler's mentality if you're a woman. Like I always think of that scene in Mad Men. I don't know if you ever watched Mad Men, but like there's an episode where Peggy, which is Elizabeth Moss's character, is in a discussion with her boss, and her boss wants her to get like this task done urgently. And she's like, this is not my pay, like this is not what I'm supposed to be paid for. So you're gonna have to pay me to do this. And he's like, okay, well, how much do you want to be paid? Like, and she was like, oh, okay, so you don't know what I make. And he's like, I could just fire you. And she was like, yeah, but then you wouldn't get the task done. So you're being incredibly demanding for a person who needs something from me. So he's like, well, she's like, how much do you have in your wallet? And he had like $500. And bear in mind, it's like the 50s, right? And she's like, yeah, I want all of it. And he was like, geez. But he had to barter because she understood in that moment what her financial power was. And like, please, for people who are not good at this, I would really advise taking negotiating classes and stuff because, remember that study that came out years ago that said a lot of women are not making money because they just don't ask? And I thought that was crazy, that a lot of women are not getting the kind of money that they want just because they don't think that they can ask for it. And the same amount of women are not applying jobs because they don't fulfill like more than 90% of like the requirements. But then men are applying for jobs where they fit like 30%. Have the audacity of men, I beg you.
We demand of you. Yes, but I love this idea, this suggestion to look into negotiating, particularly negotiating for women, because that's different than it is if you're a man. The flip side of that is women who do negotiate also are penalized. But I mean, this is the pink tax. We get penalized if we do, we get penalized if we don't. But the idea is we want to get penalized in a way that at least we're earning more money at the end of that penalty.
Yeah, but I will say, negotiation is not just a skill that you can use in the workforce. It's something that you can use with your family, with the people around you. Like there's a certain way to get what you ask for. I think a lot of people are very uncomfortable asking for what they want. And like being able to assert yourself and being able to ask for what you want takes time and it takes skill and it takes a level of confidence. And you can build that. And it's definitely a skill that's like a life skill. You can learn how to build on it and then use it in your professional life. I think that as much as there's a loss with like, yeah, you can get penalized if you negotiate, but you stand to gain if it works out well for you. However, if you don't negotiate at all, you just stand to lose. It's like when you play basketball, right? Like if you shoot the hoop, there's a chance that you could miss that shot. But if you don't play basketball, you missed all the shots.
Right. This is such good advice. And this is something that my mom really had to emphasize to me, especially when I started to travel, because I was a very like shy and reticent person about asking for myself. Asking for anybody else, I had no problem. But for myself, well, that was a whole different story. And so when I would come to her with these scenarios, she would always say, it never hurts to ask. And that is one piece of advice that I would give for every woman in the world. It never hurts to ask. If you don't ask, it's already a no.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what I was told.
But if you do ask, right? So if you do ask, your odds increase. And it's always a matter of odds, right? You're always playing a game of numbers, whether it's money or time or affection. All of it is a matter of degrees and of money and of time. Please understand that you are worth the time it takes to ask for whatever it is that you want or need, especially your wants, right? Like, I understand we might be more compelled to ask for things when there is a real need. Like, let's say you have kids who wants to be in soccer and you don't have the money for the soccer, but you're like, okay, well, I'm going to ask neighbors if I sell them these cookies that everybody loves, will they be willing to pay me for them so that I can send, little Robbie to soccer camp? But if it's something like, hey, you actually need a new pair of shoes, but you're like, well, I have other shoes that, kind of work. No, let your wants be as important as your needs. Because again, our ideas about what we want and need, our ideas are so skewed from the psyop that's been run on us for millennia. So please, 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 please understand that you're worth it. Start to internalize it.
Exactly. Another thing that we need to remember is that we've never had more bargaining power than we've had right now. Governments are shit scared about the fact that we'll walk out on them. 4B has become an international conversation because people are terrified of the fact that women might just quit society. So we have never had more power than we have right now in bargaining and asking for more. Maybe not consistently across every country. Of course, we feel for the people who live in countries like Iran, Afghanistan, who just don't have that option. But for those of you that do have that option and whose countries are on the the precipice of demographic decline or birth rate moral panic, as we like to call it, these are the places where it is the time for you to start bargaining, because these people are desperate for you to get to play ball. They're desperate for you to start families. They're desperate for you to add more workers because they see their paychecks shrinking. They see their sixth yacht fleeing into view. And they're like, you know what? I want to make sure that I can get some woman who doesn't know her worth knocked up like 6 or 7 times so that her children have to escape poverty for the rest of their lives and work for me, Mr. Tough Wall Street guy. So you tell Mr. Wall Street guy to open his fucking wallet if he wants you to participate, because you aren't doing it for free anymore. And this is what women need to understand, is that you need to understand the bargaining power you have as an individual with the person, because understand this, men will always want you, because men gain a lot more from proximity to women than women gain from proximity to men.
Always.
So you have a lot more to ask. And again, the worst they can say is no. And in FDS, whenever we say, first of all, for every guy who says you're asking for too much, there's a guy who's saying you asked for too little. So just, go after the one that is saying you just don't ask for enough, and then be like, you know what? I need to put this guy to work.
Yes. That's such a healthy attitude, Diana. It's so true. And like, the other thing to remember is, if the wheels of capitalism are greased by the blood of the peasants it crushes under its wheels, okay? That is how the whole industry runs, is off of our blood, sweat, and tears. If they don't have enough workers, what happens? The gears of production grind to a halt. This is where all that moral panic is coming from, okay? Not only that, but all of these men in power know that there is no greater danger to their means of production and means of profit than dissatisfied, angry young men. And what are dissatisfied, angry young men angry about? The lack of women.
Exactly. Always. We talked about this in, I think, the last episode, about how 100 years ago in the book Herland, like the concept of male and female utopia is almost identical. It's an all-female society. The concept of male and female dystopia is also identical. It's an all-male society.
We're in agreement.
I know.
Find those who are in accord with you and only permit them to be in your life.
Yep. And that's the thing. That's one of the few times that we're in agreement with men, because we also agree that a world filled with men would be terrible. But that's the thing, right? Like, no matter what, like when people were criticizing the female separatist movements and like 4B and stuff like that, like when women got fed up of men, the first thing they did was say, I'm going to isolate myself and cut myself off from these people and focus my time and energy on the people that matter, my pets, my family, my friends. Not necessarily in that order. And what did men do? They were like, let's create demeaning porn and AI and deepfakes and sex robots to get over the fact that all we want is for a woman to touch us and tell us we're such a pretty boy. Okay? They're dying for the actual like lifeblood of a woman. They want you to spend time with them. It will not suffice for them to spend all of their time with a robot or with like some kind of AI feature. This is not her, and they're not going to get Scarlett Johansson on the other side of the line.
And don't forget, all of the things that you say are true. That is what has led to the rise. And it's also what it has led to the highest rate ever of human trafficking and slavery. We have more slavery now than we did back in the heyday of slavery. Who are the slaves? Women and children. That's who's being trafficked. That is what the highest demand is for. So really understand that there is nothing more valuable than your time, than your presence, than your warmth, than your energy. I don't care if you're the cuntiest cunt who ever lived. There's still going to be some man who's dying to pay you for the privilege of being in your life, okay? And again, we're not talking about this like as in a manipulative, Machiavellian kind of like you get yours. No, it's about you protecting and valuing the life you've been given, the life that you have, the skills that you've earned, the sacrifices that you've made living in this world, and ensuring that in the future to come, you are cared for, you are protected, you are safe, you are unharmed. And all of these things result when you have your own financial independence.
Yep. And, at the end of the day, men and like all of the global governments and their paranoia about the birth rate and all of that other shit is not our problem. It's just not our problem. Like, stop letting them make it your problem. They're in the position that they're in. People are talking about, in 20, 30 years, China's going to face a population collapse because there just aren't enough women to partner with all the men, and then there won't be any workers. I mean, whose fucking fault is that?
Yeah, we call this the fuck around and find out phase. Okay, this is the phase where they find out. And so often we women have been the ones who have buffered and sheltered men from the consequences of their own actions. For once, let's not do that.
Yeah. Men are like that Spider-Man meme. Have you seen that Spider-Man meme where Spider-Man is pointing at
Oh, yeah, where they're all pointing at each other.
exactly. They're all,
It's you, it's me, it's me, it's you, it's us.
in this case, all the Spider-Men are pointing at MJ, really, because they're blaming her when it's actually them. Like, I think it was Khalid Hosseini said this. He was like, let me find this quote. I'll tell you exactly what it is. Give me a second.
Okay. While you're looking that up, I want to give us just a few facts about the motherhood penalty. So, this is an actual academic term. It refers to, quote, the negative impact that having children can have on a woman's career and is a significant contributor to gender inequality in the workplace. According to estimates from the International Labor Organization, only 61% of women globally were employed or seeking employment in 2022. That's compared to 91% of men. So there's basically a 30% pay gap in labor force participation. But this gap widens from 30 to 43% for households with at least one child under 6. In other words, fewer women are working with children under 6, more men are working with children under 6. And not only does this affect the pay of a woman immediately after she gives birth, but this is also a continued decrease in income for the next decade. Even a decade later, their incomes have not fully recovered. So, in other words, men's and women's earnings relative to pre-child earnings are still disparate. They're still not the same. But in the years after the birth of their first child, and the years 5 years after the birth of the first child, and 10 years after the birth of the first child, those pay gaps only increase and they never recover. So this is something that women absolutely have to understand.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's many women who have heard these statistics many, many times. The kinds of people who listen to this podcast, I think, are people who already have confirmed their confirmation bias because we knew these things. And you don't need the two of us to say what you already know and what you're already observing in your everyday life, right? But then here's the thing that people really need to understand is that they try to seek empathy from men and they say, look at how much we're struggling and look at how difficult it is for us to find work and look at how the lack of support and institutions that we have and the fact that we don't get paid as much as you and the fact that we have to fight for everything to be educated, to get a job and all these other things. And so, coming back to that quote, I found it. And the quote is great. It's like a compass needle that points north. A man's accusing finger always finds a woman. Always.
Oh, yes. Isn't this from A Thousand Suns?
Yep, Thousand Splendid Suns. And it's very true because at the end of the day, you can explain all of these things and understand them intellectually. And you could go to all the think tanks you want. And you can hear this like talked about in the World Economic Forum and all these other places. But then when you have an intellectual or just like a friendly debate with your neighborhood scrote, your neighborhood scrote will be like, but why can't women leave the men and why can't women do blah, blah, blah? Because they live in La La Land. And also, it's not even as simple as they live in La La Land. They know, they just don't give a shit.
Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, some of y'all need to realize they just don't have the empathy. They don't have the empathy.
They don't. And why should they? Because we've never compelled them to face the consequences for not having empathy. And this is something where I was just watching, like a couple of YouTubers, in this case, 2 men, and they were saying, yeah, women are always saying like, there's this gender pay gap, but that's because women have kids. They choose to have kids, and that's why they have the gender pay gap. But remember, isn't there this whole moral panic about the fact that we're not having kids? Do you see how we can never win? Okay, they want us having kids, they want us married and having their kids, but then they also want to punish us by taking away our earnings potential and then telling us it's our fault for having our earnings potential decrease because we ourselves alone solely decided to have children. So again, this is something that, like you say, there's a confirmation bias, and the people listening, they probably they get this. But I think the most important fact you pulled out is that there is no point engaging in these sorts of conversations because it is such a lack of good faith argumentation from them. It is pure ill faith that they're operating from because, like you say, like a compass fucking pointing north, a man's accusing finger will always find a woman to blame. Always.
And that's the thing. We are being blamed for this birthright crisis and like all of these issues with the workforce and stuff like that, right? Everything has a chain reaction. Earlier on, I mentioned how when the people who are working at factories asked for higher wages, the response by the capitalists was to turn that over to outsourcing, right? And so people were able to outsource even their displeasure and their disapproval towards other people, other women, other immigrants from other nations. But really, their anger should have been saved for the people who deprived them of the ability to earn a steady paycheck, because it was not the immigrants and it wasn't the women that took that away from you. And that's the same thing that's happening with the birth rate crisis right now. Because instead of spending and wasting your time being angry at women for not playing ball and not just submitting to you, you should be angry at your governments for not paying you enough to be able to actually look after a family to the point where you actually need a second income. You should be angry at the governments for not giving women adequate maternity leave and adequate pay, because now a woman has to look out for her own bag instead of worrying about starting a family with you. They're not mad at the people who deprive them of the chance of having a happy life. They romanticized their fathers and grandfathers' lives, and they were like, oh yeah, in the 90s you could like buy like a Honda Civic and like a mansion, a McMansion for like $50 and like a McNugget, you know? We get it, okay, but we're not there anymore. And the reason we're not there is because you sold your soul to the devil, and you're unhappy that the devil is not playing ball. You're unhappy by the fact that the devil turned out to be a devil and not, Jesus or something. Yeah, you're unhappy.
The bill came due.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the bill from your grandfathers and their grandfathers. Okay, they've been pushing all of this off onto you so that they can reap all the rewards. It's other men you should be mad at, not us.
Exactly. And in fact, it's Peepaw and Pawpaw's generation that realized they'd much rather spend their time on the golf course, and they could probably get a lot more done on the golf course and get, Freddie whatever from, I don't know, Idaho to come into the office like 20 hours a day, do the job that he doesn't want him to do, and so that he can play extra golf and like go and get another yacht or whatever. And then when you were like, hey, maybe 20 hours is unreasonable for a day, maybe if you want me to work this way, you should pay me more. He was like, you know what? How about no? I'm going to hire Raj from, I don't know, Madras or something to come and do your job for half of the cost. And then I'm going to feed you this information that Raj is the problem because you're too stupid to be angry at me. This is what I'm saying about the Spider-Man meme. You really should just be pointing at each other, because the actual problem and the reason why you're angry is not because women have shortchanged you for life you're entitled to, because women are trying to survive in that ecosystem as well. The life that was taken away from you was taken away from you by other men.
Boom. If they can't understand that, it's certainly not up to us to educate them, especially when we're not being paid for it. And this is why I think we're on to our next statistic, which is about women in government and representation. And this is something I think that's really important because we have had some gains. We've had some increases in the share of women in parliament, but we are still very, very far away from parity. So here are a couple of statistics. May I share them, Diana?
Go ahead.
Thank you. The share of women in parliament worldwide has been increasing in the last 50 years, but in 2022, almost 2 in 3 countries still had less than 30% of women in their parliaments. So far, 6 countries have reached a share of 50% or more women in parliament. You guys, we did it. 6 countries worldwide. Look at it. We've come so far. These 6 countries, by the way, are Mexico, Finland.
We have.
Right? That's an advance. Okay, it is an advance. Those 6 countries are Cuba, Finland, Mexico, United Arab Emirates, Rwanda, and Nicaragua. And the other little fact I want you to think about is that only 10% of countries worldwide had at least one time a female head of state in 2022. In 2022, of all the female heads of state, since we started to look at that data, only 10% of countries worldwide have had a female head of state. And so this is something else we need to look at. Like, when we're like, why doesn't our government why doesn't it have these protections? Why doesn't it have these family benefits or benefits for new mothers, et cetera, et cetera? It's because there is absolutely no representation of us in government. Hello, although we've birthed all of those. We've birthed all of those in government, and we're half of the population, and we're still not even 10% of the female heads of state.
Yep. Doing the math on like that statistic you gave about, 6 women or whatever, if you actually do the math on that, that means 3% of the leadership in government worldwide are women. So it's a total scrote fest,
Absolutely. And they're the worst of the worst. Come on. This is why I'm so excited about Kamala Harris. I will always stand a woman in politics because it's just so complicated. And obviously there are exceptions. Like, you got your Marjorie Taylor Greene, and there have been plenty of, Actually, I wanted to ask you this quick question. What's the story behind Indira Gandhi?
I was after the time that she was prime minister. So I think when she started out, people had a very high opinion of her. At least that's what my dad used to tell me, was that when she started off, she had a lot of initiatives about supporting indigenous growth. She actually banned Pepsi and like Coke and all these massive multinational corporations from the States and India. And so they had to like revitalize the industries and like come up with their own shit. So she was very pro indigenous support of local businesses. She started a lot of welfare schemes for women and children. And also, she kind of did have some of that grooming and training because her father was the first prime minister of India. So she was kind of the Nepo baby of politics. And so she was like the beginning of the dynastic politics of India because for a very long time, it was usually people and members of her family that wound up becoming prime minister. So, like, literally, several members of her family and her dynasty, her descendants, have been prime ministers of India. I honestly don't know that much about her political successes, like what she actually did that were to the benefit of the country. I know that I'm not sure if I'm mistaking this, but like if I vaguely recall, she started like the family planning scheme, which was to encourage like, a lot of illiterate families to basically think about family planning. But there was a lot of like forced vasectomies and shit like that happened. And so, and ever since then, it's kind of been like a death sentence in India to like talk about family planning at all because everyone goes back to the forced vasectomy days and like the infertility and all of that stuff. So yeah, it's like it's been very hard to get family planning in India, and which is challenging because less than 3% of Indian people use condoms. So lots of HIV, lots of STDs, like lots of issues with sexual health in general. And some of that came from mismanagement, which I think came from her time. And then there's like the political aspect of like there was like beef between her and like the Sikh community. And again, I'm not as well educated about the time period that she was prime minister because she was prime minister for quite a while. But that being said, I think the beginning of her term was more favorable than the end of it. And I think that, around the end of her term, I think was when Margaret Thatcher was on the scene as well.
That's what I was thinking about was Margaret Thatcher, because obviously, like, women aren't angels, and we're just as prone to fallacies as any human. But like, also when we're surrounded by all men in the cabinet, like, what are our odds of success? It's not like these men are rooting for us. Okay, they're all trying to get our job. They're all trying to backstab us and step over our dead body. So
I don't know anything about her as a person or anything about her values. But I do know that she and Margaret Thatcher did connect about the fact that they were the only two women in politics at that time. And so they did have some kind of empathy for each other. But that being said, my only impression of Thatcher was from The Crown. And from The Crown, she sounds like a real pick me. So I don't know. Like, I don't know how these people felt about, like, I also think that, there is something to be said about being the only woman in the room. Because I recall, when I used to go for like these South Asian film discussions in Hollywood, they used to talk about how they would like, early on in like the 30s and the 90s and the early 2000s, they were always nervous when there was another South Asian person in the room because they were always like, oh, it's my head or his. So it created a lot of inter-competition between the group because they were worried about being the person who's fired because there can only be one. They even made a joke about this in the Master of None episode where they were like, Black people just reached there can be two. We haven't reached there can be two yet,
oh my god, that's so good. Oh my god. And it's the same for, we have to be wrapping it up shortly, which is such a shame because I love this conversation, but this is ongoing, right?
Yeah. But I mean, just going back to our point about politics for a second, I think that part of the reason why, like, very few women in politics also is because it's been such a boys' club, and especially because in England it's been such a boys' club. I don't think that Margaret Thatcher got there on like a feminist agenda and had like the inclination to hire women, because as far as I can see from her cabinet, she had very few, if any, women at all. And Lundy Bancroft talked about this as well, right? The kind of person that becomes a judge who gets to adjudicate on these cases of custody and stuff are usually people who are already sympathetic to fathers and men. They're not usually on the side of women. So, it's not just about having women in power. It's about having high value, quality women in power.
And so, ladies, this is why we need more of us, okay? We need more of us to have the audacity. We need more of us to be applying for positions that we only qualify for 80% of it. Because Lord knows the men have the audacity and they get these jobs and then they negotiate for incredible salaries that are ridiculous. And we're accepting scraps. And that's the past, ladies. That's the past. Let us bury it, have it be dead and be gone, and let us move on to this new era of enlightenment, liberation, and all of the fucking money in our pockets.
Exactly. And on that note, it's been great. It's been great, Rose.
It has been great.
And, as usual, Scroats, die mad.
Die mad.